Congratulations! You just woke up on the island of Rome, which is an ancient world version of a crowded apartment building. Imagine it as a vertical slum, linked together by hope, saliva and some very problematic engineering decisions. You might live on the third or fourth floor, which means you are very poor. The higher you live, the cheaper the rent will be. When someone upstairs decides to rearrange the furniture or accidentally drops a toilet bowl, your ceiling is more likely to collapse. Your room is not much larger than a closet. The damp stone wall in winter cracked like an egg in summer. There is a hole in the wall, which generously calls itself a window, although it is actually just an opening for smoke, rain and occasionally confused pigeons to wander in. Your bed, if you want to call it that, is a straw mattress stuffed with everything you can find. Old rags and perhaps a few bugs claiming to have the right to occupy without permission. The blanket gave off the smell of wet sheep and disappointment. There was no furniture, no decoration, and of course no kitchen either, because cooking inside was prohibited. A small fire can turn an entire building into a Roman barbecue ground. It will be another 2,000 years before fire safety regulations are invented. All your belongings can be put in one basket: a cracked earthenware cup, a corset that you've worn for decades, and perhaps a wooden comb if you're optimistic about personal hygiene. The walls were as thin as paper, on which were written the private details of the neighbors' lives, their prayers, their digestive problems, and their nighttime activities. Privacy is a luxury you can't afford. Wouldn't allow it. The air in your room is filled with smoke, mold and the unique smell of people living too close. Someone is baking bread downstairs but didn't invite you. Street vendors are already hawking their goods, asking for the prices of figs and fish sauce. A centurion was giving orders to someone who might be bleeding. You are already sweating profusely and itchy all over before you even go out. You might also be inhaling lead dust from the pipes, which supply water to a few lucky people who can afford the cost of the pipes. Welcome to the morning in Rome. You are not Caesar. You are still far from being a gladiator. You are merely another soul struggling to survive in the greatest empire in this world. You still have 23 hours and 59 minutes left. Now that you have climbed down the shaky stairs on the island without falling onto the rotten planks, it's time to address the most pressing physical issue of the morning. No, your apartment has no bathroom, no sink, no running water, no flushing device, not even a bucket that pretends to be decent. On the contrary, you pick up the potty, do your best to remain a little modest, and drag your feet towards the nearest public toilet. The public toilets in Rome are not merely bathrooms. This is a social system, an opportunity to build connections, and also a test of your ability to maintain eye contact in private moments. You walk up to a long stone bench, which is carved with holes, and above it is a shallow water passage. The Romans were masters of engineering. They designed this system to transport waste away from cities. What they didn't design were personal spaces or personal stalls. You sat down, assuming there was an empty seat, right next to a complete stranger who might want to discuss politics, the weather, or his views on gladiator fighting schools. There is no door, no partition, and no obstacle between you and the person opposite you who is having breakfast while doing business. This was the most efficient manifestation of the Romans. Why waste time on a single activity when you can handle multiple tasks simultaneously? Conversation flows freely like the water beneath your feet. A retired veteran complained of his sciatica. A businessman is discussing the price of grain. The baker argued about the quality of the bread. Meanwhile, you are striving to focus on the task at hand, while the person sitting 3 seats next to you is practicing rhetoric for the upcoming court case. The concept of privacy simply does not exist. Then comes the real adventure. Clean up. The Romans provided a kind of public sponge, which was stuck to a stick and soaked in a bucket of vinegar or salt water. This is thorium. It is shared by all. The sponge you just wiped clean for your neighbor is now being offered to you with a smile and a friendly nod. Sure, you can rinse it in the bucket first, but vinegar saw something terrifying and it didn't fully believe that it wanted to cooperate. If you are rich enough, you can bring your own clothes or moss. Congratulations on your foresight and disposable income. If not, just use what others use and try not to think about its meaning. Don't even consider doing business in the alley. The law governing urination in public places is real. The fine is huge. The law enforcement authorities in Rome will not issue any warnings either. They started beating. After washing, you wash your hands in the shared basin. The word wash might be too broad. You rinse them with more water than your fingers touched in the Roman census. There is no soap because it has not been invented yet. Only water, hope, and prayer to God who deals with sudden health emergencies. When you leave the toilet, you feel your body lighter but your spirit heavier. You survive the morning toilet experience, which means you are ahead of many tourists who would scream and run away as soon as they saw the public sponge. But this is Rome, and a new day has just begun. After successfully mastering the social complexity of Roman bathroom etiquette, you might feel hungry. After all, it's morning now. The sun is rising above the 7 mountains. The greatest empire in history is sure to offer a decent breakfast. Get ready to be disappointed. Its scale will make the modern airport food court look like a Michelin-starred restaurant. Welcome to the Roman Eucharist, a breakfast where you can find anything that won't kill you. Forget about the coffee. The Romans had never heard of it. There's no tea, no orange juice, nothing that might wake you up or offer you comfort. Your breakfast options are basically bread and wine mixed with water, and there might be a hint of despair. This kind of bread is panis rusticus, a dense and chewy substance that also serves as a building material. It is made from porous grains and sometimes flour substitutes are added. If you're lucky, acorn. If you don't like it, its texture is similar to wet concrete, and it tastes just like the Roman concrete you would expect. This loaf of bread was neither baked yesterday or the day before yesterday. It might be older than some of your friendships. This wine was diluted because even by Roman standards, having pure wine for breakfast was considered barbaric. Unless you are a senator, in which case different rules apply completely. But you are not a senator. You just want to start your day with something like nutrition without immediately poisoning yourself. There is no kitchen in your apartment, remember. Therefore, this feast is to stand on the street, lean against the fountain, or squat among other equally disappointed citizens. If you have already got some olive oil or galham sauce, then congratulations. The Romans would spread this fermented fish sauce on anything. You have added a terrifying flavor to this meal that was already problematic. Occasionally, if God smiles at you and your wallet is empty, street vendors might wander around the streets selling honey pastries or chickpea shortbread. At that moment, your heart was uplifted by the possibility. Then you should remember that your budget is composed of any copper coins you find in your coat pocket, and these suppliers are not running charities. So you chew on the bread, pretending it's edible, sip the wine, and tell yourself that you're shaping your character. Around you, other Romans were also performing the same morning ritual of taste endurance. Some people seem helpless. Some people still look very angry when having breakfast. Some optimists try to convince themselves that if they chew for long enough, the bread might develop a flavor. This is how the Romans began their day, not with vitality and enthusiasm, but with carbohydrates and a slight intoxication. You are now ready to face a day of physical labor. Avoid large vehicles and try not to fall into any open sewers. Bread is like a stone in your stomach. Wine can produce a gentle hum that might make you forget how much your life is like a survival drill. But, hey, you're full. In the eyes of the Romans, not starving to death before noon was considered a success. After your inspiring breakfast of punishment bread and sadness wine, it's time to earn your daily bread. By making money, I mean you are working harder than ever before, working hours beyond the legal working hours. And such working conditions will make security inspectors in modern workplaces feel scared. Unless you are a senator, a successful businessman, or have wealthy relatives, you will find out why the life expectancy of most Romans was as long as that of the unlucky medieval peasants. You might be a worker transporting stones for another temple, and the other god doesn't seem to care particularly about your welfare. You are a potter, competing with many other potters in the market, where price cuts are the norm and quality is dispensable. Perhaps you are a street cleaner in Rome, which means you are engaged in a doomed battle against the endless stream of human and animal feces. If you are really unlucky, you might work in the sewer, maintaining Rome's great sewer system. This requires waiting in the water, where about 50% is sewage and 50% is something you don't want to identify. The salary is too low. The working conditions are even worse. Job security entirely depends on your ability to avoid illness or drowning in someone else's trash. The Roman workday began before dawn, for the sun waits for no one, nor does your boss. You work in sandals which offer all the protection and support for the wet paper. The tools you use might be the old ones your grandfather used when he was young. No gloves, no safety helmet, no safety equipment at all. If you get injured, wrap it up with a dirty cloth and continue working. Because stopping means not getting the money, and not getting the money means not being able to eat. Construction work means lifting stones heavier than you, usually balancing on scaffolding built by the lowest bidder, which no one has checked. If you fall down, your colleagues will stop to see if you are still breathing and then go back to work. Workers who die at work will soon be replaced, and their families can only rely on themselves to solve the problem of survival. If you are a craftsman, congratulations. Your status has slightly improved. You still work from sunrise to sunset, but at least you don't have to carry stones up the slope anymore. On the contrary, you have to compete with other artisans in the city for those customers who want to buy the highest quality products at the lowest price. If you mess up the order, your reputation will be ruined. Your reputation has been ruined. You have to go back and move stones or clean the sewer. Women also work because poverty does not discriminate against women. They spun wool, wove cloth, sold vegetables in the market, managed the household, and raised children at the same time, striving not to give birth. While doing all this, they pretend not to work as hard as men, because Romansociety preferred women who dressed themselves up rather than those who were exhausted. Even children have to work. By the age of 5 or 6, they will help with family transactions, convey information, or do simple labor. Education is something for the rich. Everyone else learns through practice. What they have learned is that life is hard, work is hard, and complaining is of no avail. The Romans have a proverb that labor leads to success. Work can overcome everything. What they didn't mention is that work can also conquer your back, your hands, your spirit, and your will to survive. But hey, at least you are making contributions to the glory of the empire, working hard day by day. You survived your morning work without losing any limbs or falling into the Tiber River. Now the challenge of weaving through the streets of Rome has arrived. It's a chaotic nightmare that makes the modern rush hour traffic look like a peaceful stroll in a park. Rome Street is more than just a place for strolling. This is a glad eye where pedestrians, trolleys, animals, and basic sanitation facilities fight to the death. Imagine such a picture. The sun is climbing towards the zenith and the entire city is awakening. The air echoed with the voices of thousands of people doing business in over a dozen languages, the sounds of animals, and the continuous rumbling of wooden wheels on the stone road. It smells like a mixture of cooked food, human sweat, animal feces, rotten fish, and that mysterious brown substance in the gutter. Let me reveal the plot. You won't want to know. The design of this Roman street is typical of Roman efficiency. There is a raised sidewalk for pedestrians with a passage in the middle for trolleys, drainage systems, and general flowing waste. This theory is correct. Practice is chaotic. Walking off the sidewalk without looking to either side might result in being stepped on by a cow, run over by a carriage, or baptized in the flowing contents of the city's digestive system. Traffic regulations do exist. Heavy trolleys are prohibited in the city center during the day, which means they speed along streets at night where you can't see them coming. This is like a deadly game of hide and seek, except that you are not hiding behind a tree, but behind a carriage driven by those who mistake pedestrians for speed bumps. The sidewalk was incredibly crowded. You share a space with merchants carrying heavy goods, slaves running errands for their masters, children who should be going to school but run around everywhere, beggars trying to catch your eye, pickpockets trying to snatch your wallet, and prostitutes trying to draw your attention. Street vendors set up temporary stalls wherever they could find space, which exacerbated the chaos. These stalls were usually right where people wanted to walk. They sell all kinds of things, from problematic meat pies to jewelry. They can turn your skin green. They shouted at the same time, hoping that everyone could hear their voices. There are animals everywhere. Horses, donkeys, pigs, chickens, dogs, cats, and occasionally exotic pets that escaped from the private zoos of the rich in Rome. These animals don't follow traffic rules, don't clean up, and don't care whether you are in a hurry or not. If you go to the wrong place, you will find the design of Roman sandals is not easy to clean. Public entertainment is spontaneous. There are impromptu fights among street musicians, acrobats, performers, and occasionally drunk or impatient citizens. Sometimes these performances are intentional. Sometimes they are just part of the daily life in Rome. If you are not the one who gets hit by the fish, it can be quite interesting. The smell. Oh, the smell. This is a fragrant symphony. In contrast, modern sewage treatment plants seem very fragrant. Cook food and fight against rotten garbage. The incense in the temple competes with the smell of unwashed humans. The perfume of the noble lady is mixed with the earthy scent of horse dung. This is an ancient adventure that never ends and never improves. Amidst all this chaos, you must strive to reach point B from point A without being robbed, trampled, poisoned, or accidentally joining someone else's religious group. The streets of Rome not only test your navigation skills but also your will to survive. Welcome to Roman minor-style urban planning. Now you are hot and sweaty, covered in dust, and desperately longing for something cool. The good news is that you live in Rome, a city famous for its magnificent aqueducts. These engineering wonders directly transported fresh mountains and waters to the center of the empire. The bad news is that when water reaches your body, it goes through a journey that would make modern health inspectors cry. The aqueduct system in Rome is indeed impressive. Mountain springs flow through carefully designed ditches, through valleys above towering arches, through underground tunnels, and into the city, providing water for fountains, bathrooms, and private residences. This is an engineering victory that no one has been able to match for centuries. Unfortunately, the victory of engineering does not necessarily mean the victory of public health. If you are rich enough to live in a house with private plumbing, congratulations on your good luck in the upcoming lead poisoning. The water pipes in Rome were made of lead, which gave the water a slightly sweet taste that the Romans liked. They don't understand that this sweet taste is slowly driving them crazy, leading to anemia, gout, infertility, and all kinds of other pleasant side effects. The word pipe comes from the Latin word for lead, plum, which should be a clue. But you are not rich. But draw water from the public fountain, but your neighbor lives closest to you. These fountains keep flowing and sound very hygienic until you realize that the water outlets filled with teckles are also places where people wash their hands, feet, vegetables, and occasionally bathe their children or livestock. The water in these fountains came from the same source as the private water supply of the wealthy Romans. However, when the sewage reaches the public fountain, it has already passed through a distribution system, which includes sedimentation ants where garbage is piled up, pipes that have not been cleaned since the reign of Augustus, and storage facilities that serve as breeding grounds for various aquatic parasites in the Mediterranean. It's time to go to the hot spring baths, public baths. This is one of the greatest achievements of Rome and also one of the most effective disease transmission systems. The Roman baths were magnificent and splendid, with multiple swimming pools, massage areas, exercise spaces, and social gathering places of different temperatures. Romans did business and chatted here, pretending not to be immersed in each other's skin cells. The bathing process follows a ritual. First, you take off your clothes and put them in a basket, hoping that the bather should end and will be more honest than he seems. Then you break out in a hot and dry room, or in a steaming room, sweating all over. Next, you use a curved metal tool to scrape off the sweat and dirt on your skin. This tool can remove the surface of everything and occasionally some real skin as well. Finally, you pass through the gradually cooling pools and eventually enter the cold pool, where your body systems are awakened and you wonder why you think this is a good idea. According to Roman standards, the water in these pools was changed regularly, which meant that the water would be replaced when it became noticeably disgusting, or when too many people complained about small floating lumps. Obviously, the water has neither been chlorinated nor filtered, is only filtered occasionally with a cloth. You are actually taking a bath in a bowl of hot soup, and everything in the soup has fallen from the person who got into the water before you. Skin, cells, hair, various body fluids, and any diseases they may carry. The Romans regarded this as healthy and social. Modern microbiologists classify it as a biological weapon for drinking. Many Romans enjoyed wine, and this was not merely because their cultural background was that of seasoned drinkers. They understand that wine is safer than water, especially in areas where water supply is problematic. Even children drink diluted wine because diluted wine is less likely to cause death than diluted wine. So yes, Rome has amazing aqueducts and impressive water conservancy projects. But if you want to get clean and safe drinking water, it would be 1500 years earlier. The Romans had already solved the problem of long-distance transportation of water. They haven't fully figured out how to prevent people who drink it from getting poisoned. Suppose you survive the morning without being trampled to death, poisoned, or accidentally recruited into someone's private army. You feel good about your survival skills. Then your toe touched a loose stone, an infected blister grew due to wearing ill-fitting sandals, or you got food poisoning from having a problematic breakfast. In ancient Rome, treatment was often worse than the disease itself, and treatment might actually be something that kills you. Roman medicine was based on the theory of four body fluids, namely blood, mucus, yellow bile and black bile. According to this system, all diseases are caused by the imbalance of these fluids in your body. You have a fever. There's too much blood. Feeling depressed and having excessive black bile. Do you feel sick? Yellow bile has flared up. Almost all solutions to problems require the removal of some fluid from your body, usually blood, because Roman doctors believed in the ability to treat your weakness. Your doctor, or perhaps your barber, your surgeon, and your local philosopher immediately reach out to catch the leech. These delightful creatures are applied to all parts of your body, where they gobble up your blood, while you try not to think about what else is in their digestive system. If there are no leeches, the doctor will use a sharp knife to open the vein and let the bad blood flow out. How much blood is considered excessive? This is a subjective judgment. Roman doctors were notoriously optimistic about patients' blood reserves. Obviously, you need to expel some black bile. This involves a wide variety of purification technologies and is regarded as torture in modern times. Powerful laxatives made from herbs can cause paint to peel off. Induced vomiting can make you weak and dehydrated, and dietary restrictions can make you so hungry that you can't grieve. Surgery did exist, and the skills of Roman surgeons in cutting open the human body and suturing it were astonishing. What they lack is an understanding of disinfection, anesthesia, or infection control. The operation is carried out when you are fully conscious. You hold the belt with your teeth, hoping that you will faint from the pain before the surgeon moves on to the truly difficult part. The surgical instruments are impressive. Surgical knives, tweezers, bone saws, and all kinds of specialized tools that look more like torture devices than medical equipment. Wiping between patients with a cloth or rinsing in alcohol does have some bactericidal effect, but it is not enough to prevent most infections. Postoperative care included bandaging the wound with various substances that the Romans believed could promote healing. Honey does help. Wine provides some preservative effects. Crushed herbs, which may or may not be useful at all, and occasionally animal manure, are definitely of no help and usually make things worse. A prescription is a combination of practical therapy and magical thinking. Willow bark can relieve pain. It contains salicylate, which is a precursor of aspirin, so it is effective. Honey is used for wound care and is truly effective due to its antibacterial properties. However, there are also crushed beetles used to treat various diseases, specific types of animal urine for different situations, and complex preparations involving rare herbs that may or may not exist. The treatment methods for mental illness include bloodletting, purification, and suggesting positive thinking. Depression is clearly the result of excessive black bile, so the treatment involves draining the fluid until you are too weak to be sad. Anxiety is treated with alcohol and herbs, which may or may not be real medicine. If traditional treatments don't work, it is recommended that you sleep in the temple of Pius, who is the god of medicine and hopes to have dreams of healing. This is actually a safer treatment option because it involves rest, a clean environment, and at least a pastor who tries not to make you worse. Roman medicine was not without merit. Roman doctors knew anatomy better than their predecessors, thanks to their experience in treating gladiators' injuries and military casualties. They can fix bones, suture wounds, and perform some surprisingly complex surgical operations. But they operate without understanding the basic principles of bacteria or infection control. So when you wake up tomorrow with a cold, please remember that seeking medical help in ancient Rome might require bleeding, cleansing, and even surgery by someone who didn't survive the previous patient without anesthesia. Sometimes the best medical advice is to stay at home, have a drink, and hope it will go away on its own. After a whole day of avoiding the big vehicle, breathing the lead-contaminated air and trying not to fall into the cloak maxima, you can understand that you are hungry. It's time to have cena, which was the staple food of the Romans for a day. It was as disappointing as breakfast, but with more dishes and a greater possibility of food poisoning. First of all, let's make sure there's nothing on the menu. There are no tomatoes because they haven't been discovered yet. No potatoes, no corn, no chocolate, no sugar, no coffee, and absolutely no pizza. The food that defines Italian cuisine today was completely unknown to the Romans. This was pre-Inus Italian Italy, where the cuisine included anything you could grow, catch, or steal without being executed. You sit down for dinner, perhaps on a simple wooden stool, because a chair with a backrest is a concept of the rich and foreign. Your dinner is served in a clay bowl from decades ago, and your tableware consists of a knife, a spoon, and your fingers. Forks won't be invented for centuries, so you'll be very familiar with your food. The main course might be pul mentum, a porridge made from any grain mixed with beans, vegetables, or small pieces of meat. If you think you are rich, it is thick brown, tastes like wet cardboard, and occasionally has protein lumps. Its texture is similar to that of mortar, maybe more nutritious than mortar, although it cannot be guaranteed. If there is meat on your dining table, it might be preserved in some way because refrigerators won't be invented until thousands of years later. This means it has to go through a large amount of pickling, drying, smoking, or pickling in wine or vinegar. It might also go a little bad, but the seasonings in Rome are used to mask the smell of spoiled food. This is where garum comes into play. Garum is a national condiment of Rome. It is a fermented fish sauce made by layering fish tails and salt in earthenware jars and allowing them to rot in the sun for several months. The obtained liquid is filtered out and used to flavor everything. It is very salty, very spicy, and very popular. The Romans applied it to meat, vegetables, and bread. If they sat long enough, they might have applied it to other Romans as well. It tastes like the sea's revenge and smells like the ebb tide mixed with regret. Vegetables can be bought if they are in season and you can afford them. Root vegetables, such as radishes and parsley, green leafy vegetables, and occasionally onions or leeks. These are usually cooked until they give up the will to survive, and then seasoned with salt, oil, or garum. Fresh vegetables are a luxury because it is difficult to preserve them, and they are also expensive to transport. If you can afford it, there is bread at every meal. Roman bread is denser and coarser than modern bread. If you are rich, use wheat to make it. If you are middle class, use barley, and if you are poor, use suspicious grains mixed with fillers. The fillers may include sawdust, ground acorns, or anything else that can be ground into powder and baked without immediately killing anyone. Wine is the preferred beverage, but it is always diluted with water because drinking wine directly is considered barbaric. The water used for dilution is the problematic water that you have been avoiding all day long. So, you are basically choosing among different potential poisoning methods. Wine can mask the taste of water, and water can ensure that you won't faint in the gutter before the evening entertainment begins. The dessert is made up of any available and unspoiled fruit: apples, pears, or figs, if you're lucky. Honey is used as a sweetener, but it is expensive and is usually only used on special occasions or by the rich who want to show off. Sugar doesn't exist, so Roman desserts are not as sweet and are more practical. The wealthy Romans enjoyed exotic cuisine aimed at showing off their wealth rather than their taste. Roast peacocks and replaced their feathers after boiling. The presence of stuffed dormitory ice mice, flamingo tons and other foods is mainly to show how much money you can waste on dinner. These dishes are usually more impressive than edible ones, but that's not the point. When you were having a meal, you wipe your hands on the bread and then throw it away, or wipe your hands on the common cloth that everyone else has used at the dining table. Personal hygiene during meals requires collective efforts, but the effect is not particularly good. After the meal, you are already full but not satisfied. You are a little drunk but not happy, and you doubt whether the strange-smelling garin should exist or if you need to spend the whole night getting familiar with your night pot. Roman cuisine is not for pleasure. This is about survival, nutrition, and the social rituals that sustain the empire. Tomorrow's meal will be very similar to today's. Every day after that, until you die of old age, illness, or accidentally eat something that is even less to your taste than usual. After a dinner with problematic pork and fermented fish sauce, you might want to relax, have some fun and forget that you live in a city where the air is toxic and the water is trying to kill you. You are lucky because entertainment is everywhere in Rome. Unfortunately, most of them watched people die in creative ways, while the rest risked their lives for the entertainment of others. Let's start with the main event, the Colosseum in Rome. The Romans gathered in this magnificent amphitheater to watch systematic massacres of humans, animals and, occasionally, common sense. The game is free, which sounds generous. But you realize that in ancient Rome, free entertainment usually meant that someone would die a very tragic death. If you're not careful, it's very likely to be yourself. You and 50,000 of your closest neighbors crowded into the gymnasium, sitting on stone seats, which were clearly designed by people who had no knowledge of human anatomy. The rich sat in the shade near the arena, while you sat in the stands, where the sun mercilessly shone, and most of what you saw were other people's heads. The entertainment activities began with beast hunting. Exotic animals imported from all over the empire were released into the arena and fought against each other or trained hunters. Lions, tigers, bears, elephants, rhinos and other animals traveled hundreds of miles just to please the Romans who were tired of conventional forms of entertainment. This is not a fair battle. Animals often go hungry, are confused and scared. Hunters were usually criminals or slaves sentenced to death. They did not fight for honor but because they could feed animals without weapons. This is more of a meticulous execution with dramatic elements than a hunt. Next up are the gladiators, those legendary warriors who fought to the death in the arena to win the cheers of the audience. Most gladiators do not actually fight to the death because well-trained gladiators are expensive and killing them every time they fight is bad for business. Most gladiator battles would end when a warrior was injured or surrendered, at which point the audience would vote to decide his life or death. However, some fights are set to end in death, especially when gladiators of death are inmates or prisoners of war, and they engage in their first and last battles in the arena. These people knew they would die, and so did the crowd. The death penalty is disguised as entertainment, and death is packaged as a sport. The truly special days include Narration, a simulated naval battle, where the arena is submerged. Real ships battle real crew members. When their ships sink or are stabbed by enemy sailors with real weapons, they really die. This is like a repeat of history, where no one can go home except for the participants. During the breaks of the event, death row inmates were executed in a way that entertained the public. Crucified, burned to death, fed to wild beasts, or forced to reenact mythological scenes that end with the actual death of the actor. A man might be forced to play Orpheus, a complete liar, until the moment the beast tears him apart, at which point the myth becomes reality. If the arena is too intense for your taste, you can try the circus, where the chariot races offer a slightly less lethal form of entertainment. The chariot was running at an extremely fast speed on the track. The drivers fell off the chariot, the horses were injured, and occasionally the spectators were stepped on by the out-of control convoy. This is exciting, dangerous, and involves people with a large number of bets who cannot lose money. But they must do so anyway. The crowds participating in the tank race were divided into several factions, namely the blue, green, red and white ones. The competition among these factions sometimes erupted into full-scale riots, resulting in hundreds of deaths. Supporting the wrong team in the wrong community can cost you your life. But not supporting any team will make you be regarded as a suspicious outsider, possibly a spy or a barbarian. If you enjoyed Roma, the comedy provided by Romandrama largely relies on playful humor, sexual innuendo and jokes about bodily functions. His humor is profound and extensive, allowing even those who are half-drunk and half-blind to understand. Tragedies are also unfolding, but people often know that the real tragedy lies at the end of the road, happening in the gymnasium, which overshadows the tragedy. Street entertainment is everywhere. Acrobats, musicians, storytellers, snake charmers, and all kinds of swindlers will be glad to separate you from your money, while performing impressive dexterous and deceptive feats. The people breathing fire risked burning down half of the community just for a few copper coins, while the instruments played by the musicians sounded like cats being slowly tortured. But all these forms of entertainment have a purpose, not just entertainment. The Roman government understood that those distracted by bloodshed and spectacular scenes would not seriously consider the fact that taxes, corruption, or the water supply system were slowly poisoning them. Give people bread and circus shows, and they will be able to tolerate anything you do to them. Entertainment also reinforces social hierarchy. The rich sit comfortably, while the poor sweated in the sun. Citizens enjoy rights that non-citizens do not have. Free men take pleasure in seeing slaves die. Everyone knows their place. The arena makes it clear to people what will happen to those who forget where they belong. So yes, the entertainment in Rome was spectacular, bloody and free. This also reminds us that in the Roman Empire, human life was cheap, violence was normal, and your value as a person was entirely determined by your social status and your ability to avoid being fed to lions. You survived the entertainment without being accidentally recruited as a gladiator or trampled on by an angry crowd. You might think you can relax now, as long as you keep a low profile and follow the rules. Roman law will protect you. This is lovely. The judicial system of Rome was more about reminding you that the empire could destroy you at any time rather than providing protection. And the legal system is the means by which such destruction occurs. Let's start from the basics. If you are a formal Roman citizen, congratulations. You have the right. Theoretically, you cannot be flogged in public without going through trial. You can appeal against the judgment and you are entitled to certain legal protections. If you are a Latin citizen, you have some rights, but they are less protected. If you are a foreigner, a free foreigner, you have fewer rights and no notable legal protection. If you are a slave, your property has no rights. If a slave kills his master, every slave in the household can be executed, regardless of whether they were involved or not. This is not justice. This is a form of terrorism aimed at preventing slave uprisings by holding each slave accountable for the actions of others. Criminal law is straightforward. If you are accused of a crime, you'd better hope that you can afford a lawyer because the Roman court is not interested in your statement unless you can pay someone to make an eloquent statement. A trial is a public spectacle, and its outcome often depends more on the social status of the participants than on the evidence. If you are poor and accused of theft, you may be found guilty in court before you even speak. If you are wealthy and accused of murder, you can hire an experienced auditor to convince the jury that the victim may have deserved it. and that you are actually a hero because you have provided him with a glorious opportunity to die. The design of punishment is public, humiliating, and unforgettable. The thief's hand might be chopped off or a brand might be left on the forehead, so that everyone knows what they have done. A liar's tongue may have a hole punched or be completely cut off. Adulterers may be executed or exiled, depending on their gender and social status. Crucifixion was reserved for slaves, foreigners or rebels, which made it the most common form of execution for non-Roman citizens. This is a slow, painful and open process, designed to warn anyone else who might consider disobedience. For hours or days, those crucified died of exhaustion and suffocation, while the crowd gathered to watch and vendors sold snacks. If you were a Roman citizen sentenced to death, you had the privilege of being beheaded, which was a quick and relatively painless process. Unless you have committed treason, in which case you might be thrown off oilcloth ropes, fed to wild beasts, or executed in some other creative way to express the country's dissatisfaction. Civil law is equally complex and unfair. Property disputes are adjudicated by judges, who may be bribed by either parties but are influenced by political considerations that have nothing to do with who actually owns what. The design of the marriage law is to benefit men and safeguard family wealth. Unless in very special circumstances, women have almost no right in marriage and no right to divorce. A man can divorce his wife for almost any reason, but if a wife wants to divorce her husband, she needs to prove that she has committed adultery, abandonment, or criminal acts. Even so, they may not succeed. Let laws are particularly strict. If you owe money and can't afford to pay it, you can be sold as a slave to repay it. Your family members can also be sold as slaves to pay off your debts, which creates a strong motivation for you not to borrow money that you cannot repay. But if you have already borrowed money, it won't be of much help. The legal system is also very slow. The case may drag on for several months or years. During this period, the defendant may be detained in prison, where the conditions make your small island look like a luxury resort. Many people died in prison before the cases were resolved, and the court regarded this as a divine judgment. Law enforcement work is handled by night watchmen, who are underpaid, overworked and often corrupt. They should prevent crimes, investigate illegal acts and maintain order, but they are more likely to accept bribes and then turn a blind eye, or arrest innocent people who cannot afford to pay. If you are a victim of a crime, don't expect the authorities to help you, unless you are very wealthy or have political connections. Your case won't receive much attention. The main content of the investigation is to ask if you know who did it and whether you can prove it. So when you lie on a mattress covered with sheepskin tonight to sleep, remember that Roman law was for protecting the empire, not for yourself. Justice belongs only to those who can afford it, while everyone else hopes they will never need justice. After a long day of evading legal action and striving not to be eaten by wild animals for entertainment, you might seek some spiritual comfort, a bit of peace, or perhaps establish a personal relationship with God. Unfortunately, Roman religion was not about personal comfort or inner peace. This is about public rituals, state control, and ensuring that you don't accidentally anger God who might decide to destroy the entire city because you forgot to leave offerings in the right temple. Roman religion was transactional. You give the gods what they want, and they give you what you need. Everyone is happy. The problem is to figure out what God wants because they have never really told you. If one makes a mistake, it may bring about all kinds of consequences, ranging from bad luck to being struck by lightning. All things have God. Jupiter governs the sky and emits thunderbolts when it is angry. Mars deals with war and violence, which means he's always very busy. Minerva governed wisdom and war, for it was obvious that wisdom and violence coexisted in the Roman mind. Venus governs love and beauty. Neptune governs the ocean, while fire governs fire and metal. But this is only the main god. There are also little gods in all aspects of daily life. Heart protection, door hinge. Sea locks in A is guarding the sewer. The terminal guards the boundary. Rob exante minus mold. Perhaps there is a god in charge of the normal function of your night pot. If you don't worship God properly, Your morning routine will be less pleasant than usual. In Rome, you will encounter shrines, altars or sacred spaces that require some form of recognition within just 5 steps. Nod respectfully, leave a little offering, pray in a low voice, or at least do not spit near the sacred stone. Ignoring these obligations, you are inviting God's punishment, which will not only affect you but also your entire neighbor. Religious festivals filled the Roman calendar. On Saturnalia in December, social order was temporarily reversed and slaves ridiculed their masters. On the Yin-Yang festival in February, half-naked men run around the streets, whipping people with sheepskin strips to gain fertility and purification. In June in West Aria, the sacred flame of Vesta was reignited, and the spiritual safety of the city was guaranteed. These are not optional celebrations. We look forward to your participation. Attendance is under surveillance. If you fail to show the due enthusiasm, you will be regarded as an undevout, atheistic, or suspicious foreigner. During religious festivals, business is halted, courts are closed, and everyone pretends to be devout, getting drunk and arguing about politics. Emperor worship adds another layer of complexity to your religious obligations. The emperor is not merely your political leader. He is a living God who needs people's respect, sacrifice, and open loyalty. You should burn incense on his altar, participate in the ceremony commemorating his sacred nature, and never imply that he might have any imperfections. If you happen to believe in a religion that worships only one god and consider worshipping the emperor as blasphemy, this will cause problems. Early Christians, Jews and followers of various esoteric sects found themselves in an awkward position when choosing between their religious beliefs and their continued existence. Most people choose to survive at least in public, as long as they do not interfere with traditional Roman religion and do not attract too many followers, foreign cults can be tolerated. Mysterious religions, such as Mithra's worship or Isis worship, offer personal redemption and spiritual transformation. They sound very attractive until you realize that joining these cults usually involved secret membership, blood sacrifices, and rituals, which are illegal if carried out in public. The Vestal Virgin guards the sacred flame that safeguards the spiritual security of Rome. These women were chosen in their childhood, vowing to remain celibate for 30 years and to be responsible for keeping the flame burning forever. If the fire goes out, it is regarded as an omen of disaster. If a virgin breaks her vow of chastity, she will be buried alive. The pressure of being responsible for the mental security of the entire empire while maintaining a perfect celibacy for 30 years would drive most people crazy. In Rome, divination were very serious matters. Before making any important decisions, the opinions of the birds must be sought, their internal organs examined. The omens must be interpreted by well-trained pastors who claim to understand what God is trying to convey through the flight patterns of the chickens. If the omens are not good, the decision must be postponed until more favorable signs appear. This means that military operations, political appointments, and major construction projects may be postponed indefinitely because a sacred chickie refuses to eat grains, or because someone sees a cow flying in the wrong direction. Private religious activities are also important, that they must be carried out without substituting for public religious obligations. You can pray to your family God, offer sacrifices to your ancestors, and seek divine protection for your family, but you still have to join the state religion, respect the emperor, and contribute to public festivals. So, when you kneel beside the storm at night praying for survival, remember to thank all the appropriate gods in the right order and with proper rituals, while avoiding any foreign prayers that might be interpreted as treasonous, insincere, or suspicious. God is watching, the pastor is listening, and your neighbor is always ready to report suspicious religious activities. Roman religion was not for seeking spiritual peace. It is about maintaining the order of the universe through appropriate rituals, and the consequence of making mistakes is a risk you don't want to take. You have successfully avoided God's punishment for your dubious religious rituals, and you have not been arrested for any crimes you may or may not have committed. Now was the most exhausting part of the Roman's life. Navigating through the social hierarchy is a complex system composed of ranks, relationships, and obligations, which determines everything from where you eat to your life and death. The structure of Roman society was like a pyramid, only it was a pyramid covered with priests and knives. Every step required another person to fall, and most people spent their entire lives striving not to slide back to the bottom. At the top were the senators, those outstanding gentlemen whose bloodlines could be traced back to the establishment of Rome. They owned sufficient land and could be called small kingdoms. They wear purple-striped robes and live in magnificent houses. The decisions they make will affect millions of people they have never met. If they step on them on the street, they won't recognize them either. Below the senatorial class was the knightly class, a wealthy commercial class with enough money to buy decent things, but lacking the ancient bloodline that made them true nobles. They are so rich that they can look down upon everyone, but not noble enough to be accepted by the upper class. This makes them painful, ambitious, and dangerous. Then there are the common people, ordinary citizens, including you, if you are lucky enough to be born in the right place and have the right parents. The common people range from relatively wealthy merchants and skilled craftsmen to struggling laborers and the unemployed, who rely on government food subsidies to avoid hunger. Below the commoners are the free men, who were once slaves and have been liberated, but still bear the social stigma of the past. They were not allowed to hold political positions, could not serve in the legion, and were expected to express eternal gratitude to their former masters. They generously decided not to own them as property anymore. At the bottom are slaves. They are not regarded as human beings at all, but rather expensive tools that can think and sometimes complain. Slaves have no rights, no legal protection, and no hope of progress, unless through the dubious mercy of the slave owners. At each level of this hierarchical structure, there are countless subdivisions and levels. Rich commoners looked down upon poor commoners. Urban slaves regarded themselves as superior to rural slaves. Although gladiators were slaves, they were more respected than free citizens who worked in sewers. Everyone has someone who looks down on them, and everyone has someone who looks down on them. Social progress is possible in theory, but difficult in practice. You can't spend money to enter the Senate class because membership not only requires wealth, but also ancient family ties. You can become rich enough to join the Knight Order, but this requires accumulating more money than most people can see in several lifetimes. Outside of your immediate family members, the patron-minus-client system governs most social relationships. If you want to make a name for yourself in Roman society, you need a patron, a wealthy and influential person who will protect you, promote your interests, and occasionally give you a small amount of money in exchange for your complete loyalty and obedience. Every morning, you have to attend the saluting ceremony, which is a daily ritual where clients gather at their customers' homes to show their respect, receive instructions, and compete for attention and favors. You are queuing up with dozens of other customers, each hoping to be noticed, and everyone pretends to be grateful for the chance to have gravel. If your sponsor likes you, he may recommend a job to you, lend you money, or protect you from legal disputes. If he doesn't like you or he has forgotten your existence, you can only rely on yourself. Old customers die, lose interest, or find more useful customers. When this happens, you have to go back and look for another person who is willing to accept your slavery in exchange for the minimum protection. The clothes you wear, the food you eat, the house you live in, and the people you associate with all convey your social status to those around you. If you wear overly elaborate clothes that don't match your status, you will be ridiculed for being pretentious. If you dress as shabby, others will think you are of no value. The Romans had developed a complex visual language of status indication, and everyone was constantly reading and being read. Marriage is a political and economic transaction that can enhance or lower your social status, depending on who you marry and the outcome of the alliance. Love is a matter for poets and slaves. Others get married for the sake of interests, relationships, and a hope that their children will be born into a higher social class than themselves. Dinner parties are social minefields. The arrangement of seats conveys the relative status of each person. A mistaken etiquette can ruin the relationships that have been built up over several years. You must know who to greet first, how to address everyone according to their hierarchy, and how to navigate through social, political, and potentially dangerous conversations. Even death cannot lift you out of your social hierarchy. The size and location of your grave, the materials you used for your burial, and the inscriptions on your monument are all intended to convey your social status to future generations. The poor were burned to death in public places outside the city wall. The rich have elaborately designed graves beside the main road so that everyone can see how important they are. So, where you lie on the stroma tonight, surrounded by the sounds of neighbors arguing about rent and the smell of cooking radishes, please remember that your social status might be the lowest ever. You can work harder, save money, find better patrons, and marry strategically, but the basic structure of Roman society is to keep you as you are. Thank you for not being a slave, too poor to be insignificant, and too powerless to change anything. The ladder of the Roman social hierarchy stretched infinitely upwards, but every person who attempted to climb it lubricated it with blood and sweat. Most of those who tried to climb found themselves back at the starting point. Now they are exhausted and penniless, and they are skeptical about the possibility of improvement. The sun was setting above the 7 mountains of Rome, painting the sky in a color mixed with submissive pale wine. For a moment, you might think that the end of the day means rest, quietness, then perhaps a few hours of calm. Lunch. The night in Rome is not the time when the city is asleep. When cities become darker, noisier, and more dangerous. First, let's talk about lighting, or more precisely, no lighting at all. Unless you are rich enough to afford an oil lamp that burns all night long, which few people do, you can only tell the city in the moonlight, starlight, and faint flames, which could be cooking fires or buildings on fire. Usually, unless you are close enough, either being fed or burned to ashes. It is very difficult to tell the difference. The night watchmen were the official night guards of Rome. Their mission was to patrol the streets, prevent fires, and stop crimes. In reality, they are understaffed, have low salaries, and are often more interested in accepting bribes than in their own jobs. Some are truly dedicated to public safety. But compared with the widespread chaos that occurred when criminals, fires, and 15 million people tried to coexist without adequate lighting on police protection, the number far exceeded theirs. When it comes to criminals, they like Roman knights. Thieves, robbers, swindlers, and occasional unemployed gladiators roam the dark streets, seeking opportunities. If you have to go out after dark, you may have to do so, because the city of Rome won't close at sunset and you are actually voluntarily becoming a victim. Unless you are fully armed and fast, or accompanied by someone who is fully armed and fast, you will lose something valuable. Hope this is just your money. Fire was the thing that Roman knights feared the most. The charming wooden apartment buildings you live in are essentially huge fires waiting for sparks. A stilled oil lamp, an unattended cooking fire, or even a pile of garbage spontaneously combusting could turn an entire city block into hell within a few hours. The fire in 64 AD did not start by itself. But once it began to burn, it lasted for 6 days and destroyed 10 of the 14 regions in Rome. This is not a unique event. It's a Tuesday in Rome. Fires keep breaking out. When they occur, there is no organized fire department, no evacuation plan, and no fire-miners fighting equipment except buckets and hope. Is this the person who cooks illegally or the fire that's going to burn you to death? If you are mistaken and wait too long to evacuate, you will find that Roman buildings do not include fire escape routes, emergency exits, and do not take into account the possibility that residents may need to leave quickly. The noise level at night is actually worse than that during the day. Do you still remember those heavy trolleys that were prohibited from passing through the city center during the day? They all came out at night, rumbling through the streets like prehistoric monsters, driven by those who couldn't see where they were going, and didn't care much about what they had bumped into on the way. Drunk parties streamed out of taverns and private residences, and the streets were crowded with people singing, fighting, vomiting, or all three at once. Religious processions marched through the city all the time, holding torches and beating drums, praying to the gods who might wish everyone to be a little quieter. If a politician is celebrating a victory, getting married, or simply wants to hold a parade, the entire city will turn into a noisy and chaotic carnival. The sounds of horns, drums, shouts, and the voices of thousands of people who want to have fun while not wanting to be trampled upon or robbed. Most of the prostitutes' business takes place at night, adding another layer of activity to the street. The Romans' attitude towards sex was very casual, but sex still attracted violence, crime, and those who made wrong decisions and then involved innocent onlookers. Street brawls occur from time to time, usually for money, women, politics, with the eternal question of whether the blue team or the green team is more worthy of loyalty. None of these are polite differences. If enough people get involved, these violent conflicts may escalate into community riots. If you are a woman who goes out alone at night, you will face serious danger. The streets of Rome after dark belong to the armed and the unrestrained, and to a large extent, these two types of people are alone. Women who must travel at night usually go out in groups accompanied by male relatives or security guards. Even so, they are still taking risks that could lead to robbery, attack, or even worse. It's almost impossible to sleep in such a chaotic situation. It's possible that your insula will clump together and moan as if it's about to break down. Rats scurried about in the walls, possibly governing their own little Romansociety, including politics and war. Your neighbor coughs, snores, quarrels, and occasionally screams. It's either a nightmare or a very real danger. There is always someone screaming. Sometimes it's passion, sometimes it's violence, sometimes someone is robbed or murdered, and sometimes it's just a drunk person who is lost and confused. He believes that screaming will help them find their way home. The smell in this city at night is even worse than that during the day. The garbage, sewage and rot and food accumulated during the day seem to ferment in the darkness, creating an experience at an old factory. In contrast, the battlefield seems more fragrant. However, the Romans somehow adapted to all this. They sleep in the noise, ignore the smell and sail in danger because they have no choice. This is life in the greatest city of the ancient world. If you want to be one of them, you must accept the fact that night is the time for civilization to rest, and chaos takes its place. So, when you finally close your eyes and lie on the straw mat, listening to the sounds of the city that has never truly fallen asleep, please remember that getting through the night itself is an achievement. If you wake up tomorrow morning and find that everything you had is there are no stab wounds, and your house is still there, then you have overcome the difficulty. Roman knights do not care about your comfort, your safety, or your reason. This is a test of endurance. Every day you must pass it, and the only reward for passing it is the chance to try again tomorrow. In a city full of nightmares, sweet dreams are a luxury that you can't afford. Dawn falls in Rome, provided that you have survived the night, not been murdered, not burned alive, and not smashed by fallen bricks and stones. You have completed a full day's cycle in the Roman Empire. The bad news is that you have to start all over again. Yesterday's challenge was just a warm-up for today's main activity. You wake up to the same sound. A crying and shouting baby, an argumentative chicken, and an ordinary cave in the city where the concept of sleep has never been learned. Your straw mat became even more uncomfortable overnight. Perhaps it's because the straw was compressed into something like concrete, or perhaps it's because you discovered muscles you didn't know you had. They are all loudly complaining about yesterday's activities. Your night pot needs to be emptied again, which means you'll have to go to the toilet again and use the public sponge once more. This once again reminds you that privacy is a concept that won't be invented for centuries. The others in the public toilet were talking about the same topic as those who were there yesterday, as if they were wrapped in some kind of fecal time cycle. Breakfast is the same as the bread that wanted to kill you yesterday. Maybe now I'm older and more determined to succeed. The wine is still being mixed with water. The smell of the oil still was like the fuel for the lamp, and the galuim still smelled like the ebb tide mixed with regret, because otherwise you will go hungry. In Roman society, going hungry was regarded as an unseemly act. Overnight, work didn't become any easier. These stones are still very heavy. The smell of the sewer is still very unpleasant. Your boss is still a stingy tyrant who compensates for his own miserable life by making others' lives even more miserable. Your tool still has almost no functionality. Your working conditions are still very dangerous, and your salary can only barely cover your living expenses. The streets were still in a state of chaos, stinking, filled with dangerous vehicles, unpredictable animals, and people who regarded personal space as a strange concept. Vendors are still selling unreasonable food at unreasonable prices. Beggars are still begging, and pickpockets are still doing their jobs with admirable dedication. Water still tries to poison you slowly and subtly through lead pipes, and no one realizes that it is toxic. Public baths remain breeding grounds for diseases that will not be named for the next 1,000 years. These fountains are still shared by those whose concept of hygiene is more theoretical than practical. Roman medicine was still based on the theory that all diseases could be cured by eliminating various fluids from the body, preferably blood, by using tools that had not been properly cleaned since the Punic Wars. If you are ill, you are very likely to fall ill again, because you have drunk toxic water and breathed polluted air. Your treatment may make your illness worse than before. Entertainment activities are still rife with violence. The purpose of the legal system remains to protect everyone except you. Religious obligations are still numerous, enough to occupy most of your free time. Suppose you have free time but you don't because you are busy making a living. The social hierarchy still works against you. Your neighbor is still suspicious and there is potential danger. Your chance of moving forward from the current station is still roughly equivalent to your chance of being struck by lightning uneaten by a lion during a solar eclipse. But there is one thing that can drive modern people crazy. The Romans thought all of this was very normal. They do not expect a comfortable, safe, or fair life. They don't think things will get better over time, or that their children will live a better life than they do. They understand that survival is difficult, dangerous, and often short-lived. Their entire culture is based on the assumption that suffering is the natural state of human beings. This does not mean that the Romans were pessimistic. They seek happiness where they can find it, usually in some simple pleasures, such as fine wine, friendship, sex, or watching others suffer in the arena. They celebrate festivals, tell jokes, fall in love and create art, which will inspire people for thousands of years. They are just doing all these things while accepting that life is fundamentally difficult and that complaining won't make it any easier. The Romans' attitude towards existence was basically tenacious. You control what you can control, what you can't control. You strive to maintain your dignity, but the world tries every possible way to deprive you of it. This philosophy is quite effective for those who have low expectations of life. But for those who have believed since childhood that happiness is a right rather than a rare gift, this will be a devastating psychological blow. Modern people expect clean water, safe food, effective medicine, comfortable homes, meaningful work, personal freedom and opportunities for progress. The Romans hoped to wake up alive, find enough food to live another day and die with dignity. Everything else is an extra reward. So when you start your second day in the Roman Empire, remember that you are not only facing physical difficulties. What you are facing is a completely different set of life expectations. The Romans did not attempt to optimize their happiness or fully exploit their potential. They are trying to survive with dignity in a world hostile to human welfare. This way of life may not be worse than modern life, but it is definitely a more difficult one. It requires a tenacious spirit that most modern people have never cultivated because they have never needed it. The Romans were tough because they had to be tough. Whether from a personal perspective or a cultural one, gentleness is a luxury they cannot afford. However, this harsh system gave rise to one of the greatest civilizations in human history. For centuries, Roman art, literature, architecture, engineering, law and military tactics have influenced the development of Europe and other regions. Lesson evolved into Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese and Romanian. The political concepts of Rome, such as republicanism, separation of powers and representative government, laid the foundation for the modern democratic system. But all these cultural achievements come at a price. These costs are paid by ordinary people like you, who lead hard lives in difficult circumstances, but have achieved extraordinary accomplishments in the midst of shared hardships. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the plague in the ditch. If you were not murdered, executed, crushed, burned, or poisoned in your first few days in ancient Rome, you might be quite confident in your survival skills. This confidence was about to be destroyed by the invisible enemy that the Romans had to face every day: the extensive social network of diseases, infections, and death. Roman cities were the perfect breeding ground for all kinds of pathogens, parasites and plagues in the ancient world. You live in a crowded environment with poor sanitary conditions. The water you drink is contaminated by leaden sewage. The food you eat is salted and preserved. The air you breathe is filled with smoke, dust, and the exhaled products of millions of unbathed neighbors. Let's start with the obvious killer. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery and other water-borne diseases spread among people just as gossip spreads in the social circle of a senator's wife. The Romans built magnificent aqueducts to bring fresh water into the cities, but they still did not know how to keep the water clean after it entered the cities. The public fountain shared by thousands of people every day has become a gathering place for the disease that is currently spreading. Respiratory diseases were rampant in the smoky and dusty air of the city of Rome. Tuberculosis, pneumonia and other lung infections can easily spread on crowded small islands, where entire families sleep in single rooms. Privacy is a luxury that no one can afford. Coughing is very common and is regarded as normal background noise, just like the side-minded flipping sound of a pebble or the sound of a politician making a promise they won't keep. Skin diseases are epidemics. Scabies, lice, fleas and various fungal infections spread among people through public baths, sharing clothes, and a general lack of understanding of the ways diseases are transmitted. Everyone is constantly itching, and everyone believes that constant itching is part of being alive. Sexually transmitted diseases are rampant in a culture that is very casual about sex but completely ignorant of sexual health. Syphilis was not introduced from the New World until 1500 years later, but gonorrhea, chlamydia and other bacterial infections had already become deeply rooted in Roman society. Food poisoning is at risk of occurring every day. Without refrigeration, proper preservation techniques or hygiene inspections, Roman food is essentially a biological roulette game. The fish you buy in the market may be fresh, or have been kept for 3 days and are full of bacteria. The only way is to eat it and see what happens. Lead poisoning affects everyone, but the wealthy Romans suffered even more, as they could afford lead pipes, lead-glazed pottery, and lead containing cosmetics and medicines. The sweet taste of lead makes water and wine more palatable, which prompts people to drink more lead and thus accelerates the poisoning process. Symptoms include abdominal pain, anemia, renal dysfunction and neurological damage. All these Romans blamed bad tempers, or the unhappiness of the gods rather than the consumption of toxic metals. Parasitic infections are widespread. Intestinal worms, liver flukes and other internal parasites infected the majority of people, causing malnutrition, anemia and digestive problems, which the Romans regarded as normal aspects of human survival. Parasites compete with their hosts for nutrients, which means that even people who eat enough food may suffer from malnutrition. Malaria claims the lives of tens of thousands of Romans every year and is spread by mosquitoes that breed in the marshy areas around cities. The Romans knew that malaria was related to swamps and poo. This is what the name means: the air is not good. But they do not understand the role of mosquitoes in the spread of diseases. They tried to avoid the marshy areas as much as possible, but the location of the city made it impossible to avoid them completely. Childhood diseases such as measles, mumps, measles and pertussis cause a large number of children to die before reaching adulthood. When parents expect several children to die of illness, they often postpone naming their children or become overly attached to them until they are certain that their children can survive infancy, are common and often fatal. Without proper oral hygiene, restricted sugar intake, or effective dental care, most Romans would suffer from severe tooth decay and gum disease in their early adulthood. An infected tooth can cause an abscess to spread to the brain, leading to death starting from a simple tooth. Women face more health risks due to pregnancy and childbirth. Without prenatal care, aseptic delivery conditions, or effective medical intervention, many women die during childbirth and many infants die at birth or shortly after. Even successful deliveries often lead to complications that affect a woman's health throughout her life. Little is known about mental illness, and it is usually attributed to divine punishment or demonic possession. The methods for treating depression, anxiety, and other mental disorders include bloodletting, purgation, and various herbs. These methods are more likely to worsen the patient's condition rather than improve it. Then came the plague. Major epidemics regularly swept through the Roman Empire, causing a large number of deaths and disrupting the entire social and economic system. Between 165 AD and 180 AD, the Antony plague was probably on a small scale, killing millions of people throughout the empire. The plague of the Cypriots, possibly measles, destroyed the population in the 3rd century AD. Normal life came to a halt. Markets were closed, schools were shut down, religious services were cancelled, and people stayed at home, hoping to avoid infection. The rate at which corpses were piled up was even faster than the rate at which they were buried. People dug a large number of graves outside the city wall. When all the residents die or flee, the entire community will be abandoned. The Romans were ignorant of bacterial theory, vaccination, and antibiotics. They don't know that the disease is caused by microorganisms, so they can't take effective measures to prevent its spread. They attribute their illness to the bad air, the displeasure of the gods, or unbalanced humor, which leads to the treatment often being worse than the illness they want to treat. When the epidemic hit, the Romans' response was based on superstition rather than science. They might hold public prayers, offer sacrifices to the gods, or expel those suspected of bringing divine wrath to the city. These measures offer psychological comfort, but have no medical benefits and often delay more practical responses, such as improving sanitation conditions or isolating patients. The result was that disease and death always accompanied the lives of the Romans. Everyone knows that someone has died of illness, accident, or violence. Everyone hopes that their children, parents, siblings, and friends will die from causes that can be easily prevented or treated with modern medicine. The life expectancy of the Romans was between 25 and 35 years, which depended on social class and geographical location. If you can survive your childhood, and if you are lucky and rich enough, you may live to be 50 or 60 years old. Poor people often die from diseases, malnutrition, accidents, and violence. The persistence of death profoundly influenced the psychology and culture of the Romans. The Romans were more casual about death while paying more attention to leaving a lasting legacy. They build monuments, write epitaphs, and create art that lasts longer than their bodies, for they know that their bodies do not last. The customs of Roman literature reflect this acceptance of death as part of normal life. The corpses were cremated on the piers outside the city wall, and the ashes were stored in jars or scattered in the garden. Wealthy families build exquisite graves along the main roads, where tourists can see their monuments and remember their names. But for the majority of Romans, death had no monument or memorial. They were burned in public places and their ashes were scattered in unmarked fields. Their names were forgotten within a generation, and their lives left no trace, only remaining in the memory of those who were about to die. So when you lie on a Roman bed and fall asleep listening to your neighbor's coffin groan, please remember that you are living in an era when death is always within reach. The water you drink might kill you. The food you eat might poison you. The air you breathe may infect you. The people around you may spread diseases and end your life within a few days. This is not meant to be depressing. It should be realistic. The Romans were always aware of death, and this awareness shaped every aspect of their culture, from religious beliefs to social structures and even daily lifestyles. Modern people live in an illusion that death is distant, preventable, and that medicine can cure almost all diseases, and they have enough time to achieve their goals. The Romans lived in the perception that death was direct and inevitable, that medicine was basically useless, and that if they wanted to be remembered, they had to leave their mark quickly. This creates a different sense of urgency and a different set of priorities. The Romans valued honor, responsibility, and reputation because these things existed longer than their physical bodies. The things they build stand the test of time because they know they won't. The art and literature they create tell of the universal experiences of humanity because they understand how short and fragile human life is. Now that we have determined that you might die of illness, let's talk about how to live a poorer life as you slowly pass away. The Roman economy was the most complex financial system in the ancient world, and it was also a cruel nightmare of survival of the fittest. A single poor harvest, a failed business transaction, or a family emergency could permanently destroy your life. Let's start with currency. The Romans developed a complex monetary system made of gold, silver, and bronze with standardized weights and values, allowing for trade throughout the empire. This is a true achievement, which makes an unprecedented commercial scale in human history possible. The problem is that most people seldom see old coins or silver coins because they are too valuable for daily transactions. The daily economic reality involves copper and copper coins. Their individual value is very small, but if you can accumulate enough money, you can survive. The price of a loaf of bread is about 1 or 2 donkeys, which is a kind of small copper coin. The daily wage of an unskilled worker may be for 2 assets. Suppose you can find a job, suppose the job won't kill you, suppose your employer will really pay you. There is no minimum wage, no worker protection, no unemployment benefits, no disability insurance, no health insurance, and no retirement plan. If you can work, then work. If you can't work, you will go hungry. If you get injured at work, it's your problem. If your employer decides not to pay you, that's also your problem. Moreover, you may not have the money to hire a lawyer to help you solve this problem. Grain relief funds provided free bread to registered Roman citizens. But this is only enough to barely sustain your life, that it only covers basic food products. You still need to pay for housing, clothes, oil, wine, vegetables, and anything else that sustains your life. Food relief prevents you from starving to death immediately, but it doesn't offer anything like a comfortable life. Most Romans worked in what we call the informal economy. They are artisans, small merchants, laborers, servants, or providers of various services, which may be legal or illegal. No company, no employee benefits, no job security, no career development opportunities. You keep working until you can no longer work, and then you hope your family can take care of you, or you will die soon so as not to become a burden. Slavery distorted the entire labor market. Why hire free workers when you can buy slaves? This caused large minor-scale unemployment among the free people that reduced the wages of all those who were not enslaved. Free workers had to compete with slave laborers, and it was impossible to make a profit from this. The result was that the living conditions of many free Romans were only slightly better than those of slavery. They are technically free, but economically trapped in a poverty cycle that is almost impossible to break. They have the legal right to resign and move elsewhere, but they don't have the money to do so. The situation was more or less the same throughout the empire. Banking does exist, but it is very primitive and highly risky. There is no deposit insurance, no supervision, and no guarantee that your banker won't disappear with your money. High interest rates, strict collateral requirements, and most loans are secured by property or personal guarantees. If you default, it will lead to slavery. The tax system in Rome was both regressive and cruel. The rich have ways to avoid or minimize their tax obligations, but ordinary citizens pay taxes on everything they own, everything they earn, and everything they purchase. Tax collectors are private contractors who bid for the right to collect taxes in a specific area and can retain taxes exceeding the bid amount. This has created a strong motivation for open taxation and corruption. Long-distance trade is profitable, but it is very risky. The merchant ships anchor in the storm. At bandits. Political instability can destroy business relations overnight. Most merchants who tried to get rich through trade ended up either poor or dead. But a few successful people will become fetch, which encourages more people to try. Most people have no social mobility. If you were born poor, you are very likely to die of poverty. If you were born a slave, you might gain freedom, but you would still bear the social stigma of being a slave. If you were born into a wealthy family, you might always be rich, unless you are extremely stupid or unfortunate. The foundation of economic operation is interpersonal relationships, not institutions. You need customers to look for jobs. The services provided by the client and the network of family and friends to get through the economic emergency. If you don't have these relationships or your relationships fail, you can only live on your own in a system that doesn't care about your life or death. Women have limited economic opportunities. They can't do most jobs, can't sign most contracts, and can't inherit property like men. Wealthy women can influence economic decisions through their male relatives. But poor women have almost no economic power. The Roman economy generated tremendous wealth, but most of it flowed to a few elite classes, while the majority were struggling for survival. This is neither an accident nor a temporary problem. This is how the system design works. The rich use their money to influence politics, purchase favorable laws and maintain their advantages, while the poor compete with each other for the leftovers. Economic crises occur from time to time. Poor grain harvests led to a sharp increase in food prices, which in turn caused riots and political instability. The war disrupted trade and exhausted the national treasury. Political unrest has undermined business relations and created uncertainties that paralyze business activities. When these crises occur, the rich use the resources they have accumulated to get through them, while the poor suffer catastrophic blows. Just one bad year can destroy a family that has sustained the livelihood for generations. There is no safety net, no disaster relief, and no government assistance, except for basic food relief. So when you count your few copper coins and try to figure out how to afford tomorrow's bread, please remember that you are participating in an economic system that is simultaneously the most advanced in the ancient world and completely indifferent to your personal survival. The purpose of the Roman economy was to create wealth for the empire and its elite, rather than to provide security or prosperity for ordinary citizens. You are not a valuable participant in this economic system. You are a resource waiting to be developed. When you are no longer useful, you will be abandoned, without ceremony and without compensation. Your only sense of security is what you can create for yourself by working hard, saving carefully and cultivating interpersonal relationships that might help you get through the next crisis. This is not a defect of the Roman system. This is a function. This empire was built on the labor and sacrifice of millions of people who never saw any meaningful benefit from their contributions. This is how it works. Let's take some time to appreciate the projects in Rome. Those magnificent aqueducts, roads, amphitheaters and temples are still ominous inspiring after 2,000 years. They represent some of the greatest achievements in human history. The success of planning, organization and technical skills has been unmatched for centuries. They are also monuments to human suffering, built by an army of thousands of slaves, workers and prisoners, creating lasting glory for an empire that believed their lives were worth sacrificing. The Roman roads were truly magical, straight, durable and precisely engineered highways, connecting the entire empire and allowing for the rapid movement of troops, goods and information. The saying all roads led to Rome exists because Roman engineers actually built roads connecting every corner of the empire and the capital, creating a transportation network that promoted trade, governance and cultural exchange. These roads were built by a large number of workers who carried millions of tons of stones, gravel and concrete by hand. They digged in the mountains, built bridges in the valleys and opened up roads in the forests, without any machinery that we consider indispensable in major construction projects. They used simple tools such as hammers, chisels, pickaxes and shovels, as well as ingenious techniques to move and place huge stones. The cost of labor is huge. The workers died from accidents, fatigue, sun exposure and diseases. They worked under various weather conditions, often in hostile areas, and were frequently threatened by local residents who were not interested in the Roman occupation. Many workers were slaves or prisoners of war, and they had no choice and no hope of benefiting from their labor in this matter. The aqueducts in Rome are even more impressive. These engineering wonders transport fresh water from mountain springs through underground tunnels for hundreds of miles, through valleys above towering arches, into cities, providing water sources for fountains, bathrooms and private residences. The precision required to maintain an appropriate slope at such a distance, using only basic measuring tools, represents the highest level of mathematical and engineering skills. But once again, the labor cost is astonishing. Digging underground aqueduct tunnels is an extremely dangerous job, and countless workers have lost their lives due to landslides, floods and suffocation. The mortality rate of tunnel workers is so high that it is regarded as a form of capital punishment. Convicted criminals are often sentenced to work in aqueduct construction to avoid immediate death. The Colosseum in Rome is perhaps the most famous example of Roman engineering. It is a huge amphitheater that can accommodate 50,000 spectators and features a complex underground system that elevates animals, sets and death row inmates into the arena. The construction of such a large, scale and complex structure, along with the need for sufficient crowd control, drainage and acoustics. All these engineering challenges were addressed with typical Roman craftsmanship. The construction took about 8 years and required a lot of travertine limestone, a kind of hard volcanic rock and bricks. These materials were mined and transported by slave laborers, shaped by skilled craftsmen who might be slaves or free men, and assembled by construction workers under dangerous conditions with almost no safety measures. Roman temples and public buildings represent the pinnacle of ancient architecture with their perfect proportions, exquisite decoration and construction techniques, which enabled them to survive earthquakes, fires and centuries of neglect. The Pantheon in Rome, with its huge and innovative concrete structure, remains one of the most impressive buildings of all time and continues to influence architecture today. These buildings not only require physical labor, but also skilled craftsmen, architects, engineers, sculptors, painters and various architectural technology experts. Among these craftsmen, many were slaves or free citizens. They had received professional skills training, but apart from basic survival skills, their professional knowledge did not bring them any personal benefits. Roman concrete is a revolutionary building material that enables the construction of huge domes, vaults and arches, which cannot be achieved using stone alone. Volcanic ash was added to the formula of Roman concrete, which created a hydraulic cement that was stronger and more durable than any other material in the ancient world. The development of this type of concrete requires extensive experiments with different materials and technologies. Most of it was carried out by workers who were not protected from the toxic effects of lime, volcanic ash and other substances. Many concrete workers suffer from respiratory diseases and skin diseases due to exposure to radioactive substances. The Roman baths might represent the most complex piping and heating systems in the ancient world. A complex network composed of pipes, pumps, furnaces and drainage systems creates bathing facilities, providing thousands of users with cold and hot water, steam rooms and efficient waste treatment every day. These systems require constant maintenance by workers who work under hot, humid and often dangerous conditions, cleaning pipes, adding coal to furnaces and repairing leaks. Many bath workers died of heat stroke, steam burns, ultra-bomb monoxide poisoning, and poorly ventilated furnaces. The scale of the engineering project in Rome is almost incomprehensible. The city of Rome itself requires the continuous construction and maintenance of hundreds of thousands of workers. Streets need to be paved, sewers need to be cleared, buildings need to be constructed and repaired, and infrastructure needs to be maintained. All these tasks were accomplished without power tools, heavy machinery or modern safety equipment. Workers lift huge stones with pulleys and levers, carry soil with baskets and unicycles, and shape materials with hand tools. The physical demand is huge and the accident rate is catastrophic. Roman engineers solved a problem that had not been attempted for over 1,000 years, but they solved these problems by investing a great deal of manpower. These challenges require both technical skills and brute force. They created an immortal monument to the power and wisdom of Rome, but the way they slaughtered humans was considered genocide by modern standards. The contradiction of the Roman project lies in that it simultaneously represents both the best and the worst aspects of human civilization. The technological achievements are truly impressive and admirable. The casualties were heavy, and it is worth remembering. Roman monuments are both celebrations of human capabilities and cemeteries of human sacrifices. When you see photos of Roman ruins or visit them as a tourist, please remember that every stone was placed by those who might have lived a short and hard life, and they died without recognition or reward. Glory belongs to Rome. Suffering belongs to those workers who have created glory with their blood, sweat, and lives. So far, we have always assumed that you are a male Roman citizen, which has already put you at a disadvantage compared to the wealthy elite. But what if you were a woman? Congratulations on drawing the last straw in the Roman social hierarchy. In ancient Rome, being a woman meant going through all the hardships of Roman life, while also dealing with legal, social and economic restrictions designed to ensure that you would never have any real power over your existence. Let's start with the legal reality. Roman women were under a permanent legal guardianship known as tutelae. This means that at every stage of your life, there are always some people who have legal authority over your decisions, your property and your person. As a child, you are under your father's authority. When you get married, this power is transferred to your husband. If you are a widow or divorced, it may be transferred to a male relative, or even a guardian appointed by the court. You cannot vote, hold public office, serve in the military, or represent yourself in legal proceedings. Without the approval of a man, you cannot sign a contract, buy or sell property, or conduct business. You can't even make a will without the permission of your guardian. Your guardian can revoke your permission at any time. For Roman women, marriage was not about love, companionship, or personal achievement. This is a commercial transaction aimed at establishing a political alliance and transferring assets among families. In fact, you have no right to decide who to marry, when to marry, or under what conditions to marry. Your father chose your husband based on political and economic considerations. Your opinion is of no consequence. Most Roman women got married at the age of 14 or 15, usually to men who were much older. You might have got engaged when you were still a child, and married before you were physically or emotionally ready to take on the responsibilities of adult life. Your wedding is a public ceremony to celebrate the union of two families, not the beginning of your personal happiness. Once you get married, your main responsibility is to have male heirs to continue your husband's family. Your value as a wife is mainly measured by your fertility and your ability to have a son. If you are not pregnant, if you have a miscarriage, or if you only give birth to a daughter, this is considered your fault and could be a reason for divorce. In ancient Rome, pregnancy and childbirth were extremely dangerous. Without prenatal care, without understanding of appropriate nutrition during pregnancy, without aseptic delivery conditions, and without effective medical intervention when complications occur, many women die during childbirth, and many infants die during childbirth or infancy. If you survive the delivery, you may face years of repeated pregnancies as you try to give birth to the male heir your husband's family desires. Contraception does exist, but it is primitive and unreliable, mainly composed of various herbal preparations and physical barriers, which may or may not be effective. Many women spend most of their adult years either being pregnant or recovering after giving birth. The education you have received, if any, is limited to family skills and basic reading and writing abilities. Wealthy women may study reading and writing, but higher education such as philosophy, rhetoric, or law is reserved for men. People expect you to have sufficient knowledge to manage a family, but not enough education to challenge male authority or participate in public discourse. Women's economic opportunities are seriously limited. Women are not allowed to do most jobs, establish business partnerships, or inherit property on the same terms as men. If you are wealthy, you may influence your economic decisions through your male relatives, but you do not have direct control over your financial resources. If you are poor, your choices will be even more limited. You can be a servant, a tailor, a midwife, or other occupations suitable for women. But these jobs offer very low salaries and no security or promotion opportunities. Many poor women turn to prostitution, which is legal but disgraceful in society and dangerous to their health. Divorce is possible, but it is much easier for men and women to get divorced than for women. Your husband can divorce you because of adultery, infertility, or even behavior he deems inappropriate. You can seek divorce, but only in very special circumstances. If you succeed, you may face social exclusion and financial difficulties. If you are divorced or widowed, you may have more freedom than married women, but you also face significant challenges. Your financial resources are limited, economic opportunities are scarce, and social pressure forces you to remarry as soon as possible. Unmarried women are suspected and are usually regarded as promiscuous or morally corrupt. Child custody laws are very favorable to fathers. The child belongs to the father's family, not the mother's. If your marriage ends, your children may live with their father or his relatives. After a divorce or the death of your husband, you may have little or no contact with your children. For sexual behavior are extreme. Men are expected to be sexually active and praised for their conquest. A woman should be pursued before marriage and be loyal after marriage. Any deviation from the standard may lead to severe punishment, including divorce, social exclusion, and even death. The religious customs of Rome often strengthened the subordinate status of women. Many religious roles are reserved for men, and women's participation in religion is often unlimited to family ceremonies or cults, specifically for women. Even if women served as priests, they were usually under the jurisdiction of male religious officials. Despite these limitations, some Roman women did achieve prominent status and influence. Wealthy women can exercise important the minus scene's power through their relationships with powerful men. Some women have become successful businesswomen, poets, or art patrons. A few people even influence political decisions through family ties. But the success of these outstanding women has nothing to do with the system, not because of it. Compared with every live-by who influenced the policies of the empire, or Sol Picaie who wrote widely acclaimed poems, there were thousands of women who spent their entire lives under the control of men, giving birth to children, managing the household, and dying in obscurity. Ironically, Roman civilization was entirely dependent on the labor and sacrifice of women. Women gave birth to and raised the next generation of Romans, managed complex families to support men's careers, and provided the necessary economic services to keep the empire running. But this crucial contribution is largely invisible and offers no return at all. Roman women were expected to be strong enough to give birth, intelligent enough to manage a family, and resilient enough to endure any hardships that life brought. But they are also expected to remain subordinate, silent, and grateful for any protection and privileges that men choose to offer. Therefore, if you were a woman living in ancient Rome, please remember that the challenges you faced were not merely the physical difficulties in daily life, the continuous threats of illness and death, or the harsh realities of Roman politics and economy. You also have to navigate within a social system specifically designed to limit your choices, control your behavior, and ensure that your life serves the interests of men rather than your own desires. This does not mean that Roman women were passive victims. Many women have found ways to play a role under the constraints they face, developing female friendships and support networks, using religious participation as a form of social engagement, and finding creative ways to influence decisions that affect their lives. But the fundamental reality still exists. In ancient Rome, being born a woman meant accepting a lifetime of restrictions that would limit your opportunities, control your choices, and subject your interests to the men around you. It survives in a difficult mode with additional obstacles and less rewards.